I couldn't believe it actually happened, but it was kind of inevitable as well, wasn't it? Now that the dust has settled after the Qatar Grand Prix, I think it's pretty clear now that the rivalry between Russell and Hamilton has now hit crisis point. This follows Hamilton's collision with Russell, which Hamilton then took responsibility for, but ultimately the loss of 2 podium positions, which seemed pretty nailed on. Honestly, that move that Hamilton made in the first corner, it seemed like something you would see at go-karting on a stag party. And then we saw an excellent recovery drive from Russell, getting a, kind of damaged car all the way up the grid to 4th place. Just shows what he can do. Just before we crack on, please make sure to subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date with any of my new content. Now, Russell and Hamilton have been knocking paint off each other all season so far, but we all kind of knew that one big accident where at least one car would DNF would eventually come. But at just 28 points behind Mercedes, Ferrari will now be smelling blood. And if there's more situations like this where the Mercedes are running into each other, taking points off each other, all this sort of thing, and Ferrari get a really strong points finish, they are going to be right on Mercedes' tail before we know it. This could cost Mercedes 2nd place in the Constructors' Championship and also that prize money to go with it as well. But to be honest, I've always kind of sympathised with team managers and crew a lot as well compared to drivers. I've always preferred playing Football Manager compared to FIFA. And I've heard firsthand how these selfish decisions that drivers can make sometimes have this knock-on effect to the real men and women within the team. And that knock-on effect can be on a morale level, a financial level, but ultimately it can be devastating. Toto Wolff surely now has to bang Hamilton and Russell's heads together and remind them whose cars they're driving and that neither of them are bigger than the team. Now, in fairness to him, though, Hamilton did take responsibility for the accident and did admit that it was his fault. He later apologised to Russell and made sure that this was all captured on video, but I feel like it's going to take more than just a couple of seconds Instagram video. This is going to take a real sit down and a real conversation to get it right, I think. However, shortly after the incident, it was Russell apologising on the team radio and trying to justify himself as to what went wrong, and that kind of shows where his head is at, especially after the incidents in the last few races which were his fault. But I think Hamilton admitting fault was the right thing to do and also a strength of character, but also an indication that he absolutely doesn't want things to decline back into the way things were during the Rosberg years as well. But trying to look at this from a more positive angle, this is now a real chance for Mercedes to draw a line under this, assess their driver dynamic, which is faltering a lot, and also for Toto Wolff to just establish some discipline amongst his drivers as well. Toto had to even intervene on the team radio whilst he was at his house recovering from surgery. He wasn't even at the race. He was live from his house. I've never seen this happen before, and I think this is also an indication of just how bad things are at Mercedes right now. And also, can you imagine the state of Toto Wolff's coffee table after that move at the start as well? I mentioned a few of these points in my previous video on George Russell, but this really indicates the need now for Toto to come down hard and squash this war of egos that's starting to appear at Mercedes right now. Now, obviously no driver wants to get beaten by his teammate, but it's the same as working in any office or working in sales or something. No one wants to get outperformed by their colleague, but ultimately it's better for the company as a whole. But surely if there's someone else out there on the track and someone else that you can rely on and trust, it is your teammates. And Russell and Hamilton are not able to do this right now because it's simply a matter of egos and they are just not able to trust each other. Apparently prior to the race, they even had a chat and came up with a plan of how to conduct the start of the race so that it was mutually beneficial to both of them. There was a plan in place. But in F1, same as we've learned in military history, no plan survives contact with the enemy. But the intention to do good and cooperate was there, but it just wasn't followed through. It's like each driver thinks the other one has a knife behind their back or something. But as I touched on, this squabbling now between Russell and Hamilton has now allowed Ferrari to creep up behind them in the championship. Yeah, Ferrari, remember that team who you wouldn't trust to boil an egg at the start of the season? Well, they are now just 28 points behind Mercedes. Now say a similar thing happens at the upcoming US Grand Prix where there's a single Mercedes DNF or a double DNF due to the two drivers squabbling against each other. All Ferrari have to do is have a strong points finish, and they are right up there again behind Mercedes. They cannot afford to finish third again in the constructors, and because they've made an absolute meal out of this season and just wasted points when they were on a plate in front of them, this has allowed Ferrari to just catch up quickly and be right behind them. This should be well out of Ferrari's reach by this stage. And again, this is why Toto now has to come down hard on both of them and remind them they both drive to serve the team, not the other way around. He needs to remind them that there are some very capable drivers out there who would love to be in a Mercedes seat and would do a good job, and that neither of them are irreplaceable. Look, I know they've both got contracts until 2025, but I think we've seen in F1 that contracts aren't worth the paper that they're printed on. And I'm sure now Toto is going to have to come back to work a little earlier than he would have expected from his surgery, and probably put Russell and Hamilton in their place a little bit and just remind them who's the boss. I mentioned in a previous video how everyone in the team, top to bottom, man and woman, receives a bonus based on the team's performance in the Constructors' Championship. I know George and Lewis are both multi-millionaires, but if you are just a regular person working at the team at the factory, and now you can't afford your holiday that you were looking forward to, or you can't afford the cost of living because their battling and squabbling has cost you second place in the Constructors' Championship and that bonus you were looking forward to, you would be absolutely fuming. And this sort of thing can just destroy the atmosphere and morale within a team. And I think Toto needs to remind the drivers that this kind of factor does exist and that it's not just about them. Now, moving forward, what this does serve as is a bit of a reality check, but also a chance for Hamilton and Russell to grow as men and put their differences aside and move forward from this. This wasn't quite rock bottom for Mercedes. It could have been worse, but it wasn't far from it either. Perhaps this realization and clash of egos that could potentially split the team and lead to a rivalry of some sort within the team simply isn't worth it. But also, Toto Wolff has to take some responsibility because he was the one who signed Russell in the first place and upset the clear 1 and 2 dynamic that existed at Mercedes when Valtteri Bottas was around. Now, Hamilton can still secure second in the Constructors' Championship, and Russell, I don't think it's outside the realms that he could finish 5th ultimately, but this needs both drivers to put their differences aside and work together. Now, whilst I think George has been the unluckier of the two, it is probably more beneficial that Hamilton gets up to second place in the Drivers' Championship. So therefore, this might require Russell to bide his time a bit longer and do a couple of jobs and a little bit of business for Hamilton here and there. Remember a couple of years ago when Russell was at Williams and he was saying to the team over the radio to sacrifice his race if it means Latifi getting into the points. Latifi was ahead of Russell in that race, but if Russell showed that sort of dedication and teamwork and just willing to pretty much put himself on the line there, I think that would really pay off for him in the long run. He won't be submitting or rolling over for his teammate. It is simply just playing the game and being smart. But also, Hamilton needs to do this sort of thing as well. He needs to realize that it's not 2020 anymore, and sometimes he will have to do things during a race that might make him feel a little bit uncomfortable, but would ultimately help his teammates, such as not trying to overtake Russell in the first corner at Qatar, wrecking both your races, such as not pushing Russell when he's trying to overtake Norris at Singapore, leaving Russell to try and defend his own position whilst trying to attack the one ahead. Look, and I know I'm coming down a bit hard on Hamilton here, but a driver as talented and experienced and as decorated as he is, he should know better than this. The final races of the 2023 season is going to be crunch time for Mercedes and their drivers. If Toto Wolff delivers the severe bollocking that I expect he will, or maybe even has by now, he can remind George and Lewis of their position and ultimately get rid of this aftertaste that might be hanging around after Qatar and finish the season positively and on a high note. I mean, who knows? One of them or both of them might even get a win yet. We've seen George being able to play the team game before at Williams, and he was pretty good at that, I think. But whether George and Lewis can do it together as a unit at Mercedes, we'll just have to wait and see. Anyway, so there we go. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it. Please be sure to subscribe. Thanks very much, and we'll see you soon.